that a little bit?
Oh, sure. I got a phone call from Pancho. The tournament was the tournament was being held at the La Quinta Hotel Tennis Club at the time. We hadn't moved to the Grand Champions yet, certainly not to the Indian Wells Tennis Garden. And I got a phone call from Pancho saying, Charlie, I have this young 16-year-old kid from Las Vegas. I think he's really talented. You give him a walk card if there's room. Is there a walk card? Can you give him a walk card into the tournament? And I said, Pancho, if you're requesting a walk card, absolutely. I could never say no to Pancho. So I didn't even know who he was talking about. So he told me, well, his name is Andre Agassi. And so I said, fine, have him come down. He's got a walk card. He's in the tournament. So
No questions asked.
no. Pancho said, "Can you give him a walker?" I said, "Absolutely." If you think he's good enough, he's good enough. He says, "Great, I'll give him a walker."
And you knew he was, what, 15 or 16?
I think he was just turned 16 at the time, and
And you're still okay with that?
yeah, absolutely. I did the same thing with Michael Chang and Pete Sampras. They were playing, and the Williams sisters. When they were young, they would come, and I would give them walkers. I always loved watching the new young prospects. And but anyway, Andre came, and I remember he basically had a crew cut on the top of his head, but he had long. His hair was very long everywhere else, and so he came with his brother Philip, and first round he played John Austin, Tracy Austin's husband, who was a teaching pro here for many years at PGA West and at La Quinta, and John obviously was.
Wasn't it her brother?
Pardon me?
Wasn't it Tracy's brother?
Tracy Austin's brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he played John Austin in the first round, and John obviously was really pretty much on his way out of playing on the tour, and Andre beat him. Andre beat him pretty handily, actually. It was straight sets. I mean, maybe it was 6-4, 6-4, something like that. And then he had to play Mats Wilander, who was then the number one player in the world. Second round, Andre had to play Mats Wilander, and so Mats Wilander comes into my office, and he says, "Who is this Agassi?" And I said, "Oh, he's a good young American player. He's young. He's 16, and he's got a really good forehand." And I said, I think if you keep the ball away from his forehand, you wouldn't have any problems. I didn't know Andre's game that well. I just watched him play once. And so Mats goes out and plays him, and I go watch a little bit of the match, and Mats is hitting every ball to Andre's forehand. So, and I'm saying, well, that's how much I know about the game of tennis, And so, and obviously Mats was too good for Andre, and he beat him. So Andre lost, but he was an amateur. And then the story continues that he and his brother Philip come into my office, and I had an office. It was a tiny little office. It wasn't the entire office where all of us were there was not much bigger than this room right here. And he said, I'm not a professional, so I can't accept prize money, but can I get some reimbursement for my expenses? And I said, absolutely, you can get reimbursements for your expenses. And so I said, have you kept track of how much money you spent on your way down here while you were here, and figure out how much you're going to spend on your way home? And he said, well, we really haven't kept track of that. So I said, well, that's not a problem. I said, here's a yellow pad and a pencil, and you guys, he was with his brother Philip, said, you guys sit down there in this chair and just figure it out, do it to the best of your recollection, what these expenses are. So they sit there, and they're there for, it seemed like an hour, but I'm sure it was only like 10 minutes or so, and they're talking between themselves. And so they come over and say, well, this is what we think it is, and they presented me with something. It was, I don't remember the exact amount, but it was something like $300 or $400 or something like that, $300 something. And at that time, second round prize money in the tournament was $1,000. not a lot of money by today's standards, but in those days, you know, that was quite good money, $1,000 to be in the second round of the tournament. And so they present me with this thing, and I'm looking at it, and I said, well, there's no way. I said, you say you spent $40 in gasoline to drive down here, because they drove from Las Vegas, and I said, there's no way you could, you know, your gas is only going to be $40. I said, it's got to be $400. Make a long story short, I gave him the full $1,000, okay? I mean, I just said, well, this has got to be that, and then I upped everything to make sure that they got $1,000. Now they know, and they knew that that wasn't true, but it, you know, so they're kind of sitting there like, we like it, but you know, they're feeling a little guilty. There's a little guilt look on their faces, and so I then say to Dee Dee, you know, who was my assistant then, I said, Dee Dee, just write him a check for $1,000, and you know, that's it. And I left them there, so they wouldn't even argue. So Dee Dee gave him $1,000, and they obviously took it. Then the sequel to that is some years thereafter. It's only about 4 or 5. I think it was about 4 years thereafter. Andre is now one of the best players in the world, and he gets to the finals of the last championships of the year, which is the ATP Finals, the Masters. Used to call it the Masters at the time. And he's playing in Frankfurt against against Stefan Edberg in the finals. He's playing Stefan in the final, and they play a sensational 5-set match. Andre wins, and the winner for that tournament won $1 million. It was one of the first $1 million checks given in the sport. And so the next morning after Andre, we watched, my wife and I watched them the entire match, and the next morning when we were flying back to California, we run into them at the airport at the Lufthansa terminal, the Lufthansa lounge. And so I see them, and so I go, hey, Andre, Philip, you know, Andre, congratulations, what a great match you played yesterday. And Andre says to me, he says, God, it's amazing that you walked in here. I said, because we were just talking about you. And I said, why? You know, so he said, well, you remember way back then when you gave us that $1,000? And I said, oh, okay, yeah, you know, and actually I remember it now because they reminded me then. Otherwise I probably would have forgotten about it. And he said, well, that $1,000 meant more to us than the $1 million we just won yesterday. And that really kind of touched me, you know, and I said, you know, wow. And he told me a lot about Andre, you know, and told me that he remembers and that he's appreciative, and you know, I didn't know how to answer that, you know, and so I think I may have said something to the extent, well, you know, I'm glad that I was able to do that, you know, that's about all I can say, you know, and so, but that was really, you know, this whole kind of my all these events that I had with Andre, and once again, you know, you do certain things with players like that, and you have certain, I guess, encounters or things that happen between you that you always will remember, and I always will remember that, and I know they do too, because his father actually thanked me also, subsequently thanked me about, you know, thank you for giving us that $1,000. In those days, they didn't have any money, and so they were very appreciative.
And this parts of this episode, or at least his wild cards, included in his autobiography as well. Do you remember reading about it?
In his book?
Yeah.
Yeah, the road he wrote about it was maybe they were thinking that way, but I mean they wrote about it. It was not really quite accurate from my version of it. I mean, he said that they were trying to hustle me into giving them $1,000 or something, and I didn't think they were hustling me at all. I think they just presented me with. I remember I said, you know, there's just no way, you know, that you guys could spend this money. I said, you know, this is how much, you know, you deserve, and you know, and I gave him the $1,000. There was no argument, you know, so.